Okay, are you guys ready to?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we are very excited to talk about the Lau Plan. So, everybody have energy?
Here we go.
Yeah? I'm compelled to do everyone deep breath in through the nose and release through the mouth. Okay, you with me?
We're with you.
Okay, because this is a very, very important topic. This is very aligned to our equity goal, our achievement goal. So a little sad that we're at the end of the night because I want everyone's full attention because I think you guys are going to care a lot about this. So basically our objectives for this short workshop are to briefly explain the policy changes that you had in first read this evening. So you understand the context behind them. And then really where we're going to spend our time is helping to build all of your understanding about the Lau Plan, both just what a Lau Plan is, where it comes from, and then what we're kind of featuring in terms of the revisions that we're in the midst of making to our Lau Plan, and the implications from that in terms of programming and some emerging fiscal impact, though I will caveat that we don't have tons of specifics on that. We're just trying to kind of give you guys a sense of what we see emerging, and that will get baked into the budget process. Wow, this is...
I can do it for you.
Okay.
This is the last one.
Yes, my last one. So in terms of the policy itself, this is something the curriculum committee reviewed. Basically what you need to know is that the changes, there's a bunch of red line, but they're all just technical. So there's nothing substantively different in terms of the policy itself. A few of the technical changes are that we changed limited English proficiency to students who are English learners. That reflects what is used at the national level and at the state level, and also we believe is more assets-based. We added the acknowledgement that we've restructured to have a Department of Language Development. That happened a couple years ago, and so just naming that so it's accurate in the policy. And then there's just some streamlining to the language throughout that was partially recommended by staff and also by our lawyers. So that's really it in terms of what you're going to be voting on. Again, the substance is really in what the plan is, but that's not something that's in policy at this level. Mr. Rodriguez, can we pause and see if there's any questions on this? Because this is the vote piece, and then we're going to move into the actual plan. I just want to make sure folks are good.
Do we have any questions on this?
Very straightforward. Okay, awesome. So I think you all know Carlos. He's going to take it away and build more of your background knowledge around the plan and step you through some of the important things that we want to be focused on as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here with you this evening. So first thing I'd like to do is just provide a little context for our Lau Plan, or Lau Plans in general. And just so that you know, every school district every public school district in the country that has English learners is required to have a Lau Plan. And you know, in a moment, I'd like to share a video that the curriculum committee found very helpful to provide a context of why we have Lau Plans. But I would just preface it with saying that prior to the Supreme Court decision that led to the Lau decision, if a student came to a public school without knowing English, they were basically out of luck and had no recourse about their public education. That changes with the Lau Plan, with the Lau decision, and so I'm going to share this video that it's about 12 minutes long, but we're only going to see the first 4.5 minutes, and the curriculum committee members that saw it found it enlightening, and I came across it a year or two ago and found it very helpful as well. So, ooh, did you hear that? All right. So.
When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note. This note was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Today's standards for English language learners are a legacy of Reverend Martin Luther King. It's a gift from the great civil rights leader to the nation's newcomers and children of immigrants. Today, there are over 10 million children in school who grow up in homes speaking languages other than English. These students have equal rights to the opportunities of education, the same as for native speakers of English. In other words, they have the freedom to learn and the freedom to talk. This right to an equal educational opportunity is based on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, hard fought and won by Reverend King, who was the leader of the civil rights struggles of the 1960s. President Lyndon Johnson signed the law in 1964 under his watchful eye.
Of course, people cannot contribute to the nation if they are never taught to read or write. So we want to open the gates to opportunity.
Kinney Lau was a student of Chinese ancestry, attending the San Francisco public schools during this time. Kinney Lau struggled in school, not being taught English, not learning in school. Teachers spoke only English and made no effort to teach him English, and classes were entirely in English. He had no freedom to talk. Parents complained, but were told he has what every student is given, provided the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum as all other students. A lawsuit was filed on behalf of Kinney Lau, who represented 2,856 school children in San Francisco, alleging violation of the Civil Rights Act that outlawed national origin discrimination. The case made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1974, the court ruled unanimously that Kinney Lau's civil rights were violated. They wrote, "There is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum. For students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education."
Okay, great. Everyone listen up. So we're going to want to work on we get ours from the answer and the information in the story, okay? We're going to go ahead and practical tests and try the actors test. Oh, test your test.
They went on to write, "We know that those who do not understand English are certain to find their classroom experiences wholly incomprehensible and in no way meaningful. Imposition of a requirement that, before a child can effectively participate in an educational program, he must already have acquired those basic skills is to make a mockery of public education." The San Francisco Unified School District, found in violation of the Civil Rights Act, was required to come up with a plan to give students access to English and to also have equal access to the regular curriculum. In honor of Kinney Lau, the plan came to be called the Lau Remedies. Thank you, Reverend King, for standing up for the children. Without the Civil Rights Act, it would not have happened.
So that's a little history of Lau plans, and I think a key takeaway is that we as a school district are responsible for our students' learning of content and English, the English language. So just want to take a look back at where we have been with our Lau Plan. We currently have a Lau Plan that was last revised in 2010. And we were in the process of revising it in 2016, but at the time there were some changes at the state level around proficiency, around guidance on what to include in Lau plans. and a couple of other factors. So that was paused. And in the meantime, we have been using the 2010 Lau Plan, but we've also been guided by our English language development vision and our an EL ratios spreadsheet that helps us to really examine who our English language learners are and how we allocate our resources. I'll share some of that in just a moment. The Maine Department of Education did finally, in the summer of 2019, last summer, release its template for Lau Plans, and so that's led to a very busy fall, which has included edits and revisions to our Lau Plan, 2 meetings with our Lau Plan Advisory Committee, input from our English language teachers and school leaders, and it's continuing even as we go through this school year. The fall did sort of culminate in sharing of some of this context with the curriculum committee here, and just want to take a look at what lies ahead for this Lau Plan. You have the policy that was submitted this evening, and you'll have a chance to vote on that at the next school board meeting. The handbook is not technically part of the Lau Plan, but it's really sort of a practitioner's user's guide and a very helpful document to our educators. Once we have the plan sort of in its more or less final form, we will be sharing it with school staff and with community members. I think this is an exciting time. I'm very excited with the level of thought and commitment to making this plan really not just a compliance document, but really something that breathes life and spirit into our equity goal and our Portland Promise. And I think the more you dive into the plan, I think the clearer that becomes. And this is all in preparation for the essentially full implementation for the next school year. Who the Lau Plan sort of has forefront in its development is our English learners, or are our English learners. This is a snapshot, late November, early December. This is a dynamic number. It changes, obviously. December and January, in fact, have been pretty busy. So we're probably over 1,500 students that are English learners right now. Broken down, that's about 800 plus students that are access levels 1 and 2, which means they are beginning level. They're emerging English learners. And we have close to or over 600 at this point. Students who are a little bit more advanced, so they're developing and expanding their understanding and reading, writing, listening, speaking in English. It also includes, it doesn't include, but in addition to our English learners, we also have about 300 students who have recently exited English language services. They've become proficient, and we must monitor them for 2 years beyond their date of proficiency. So that is another group of students that fall under this Lau Plan. It also includes almost 500 new arrivals, recently arrived in the last month, last 2 months, that came over during the summer and even last spring. So one thing that our new arrivals, one characteristic of our new arrivals that's different currently than it was in years past is that we are currently seeing more asylum seekers and fewer refugees, which has an effect on sort of the characteristics of some of our English learners and some of the experiences that they've had. So when you start diving into who our English learners are, you actually get a much more complex picture. So one that includes not only their English language proficiency or how long they've been exited from English language services, or what type of new arrival they are, and in many cases, or in some cases, they've had some very challenging circumstances that we have to make sure that we are accommodating and take into consideration when we're planning for our students. We have students who are literate in their first language and students who are not literate in their first language. We have students whose parents speak another home language or native language than they do themselves. We have students that are limited, that have had limited or interrupted formal education. So they haven't had continuous education in several countries that they've been in. We also have students who are long-term English learners. So we're expected to have students exit English language services after about 5 years. So students who have not exited or have exited in 6 or more years, students who are still receiving services and haven't been exited by their 5th year of receiving services are considered long-term English learners and have other demands as well. Some students have special education services. Some students fall under our McKinney-Vento homeless youth. So this is a complex group of students that we have different programming for. A student who's at a level 4 of English proficiency that's native, is literate in their native language, receive different services than a student that has special education and EL service needs. So I want to highlight a few key pieces of the revised Lau Plan and highlight some key shifts in the revised plan. Up on the screen, you'll see essentially the table of contents from our Lau Plan, the revised one that was in your packet. And I want to highlight Section 4, which is development of individualized language acquisition or English learning programming. So these are elements that the previous Lau Plan had as well, but this Section 4 here is something that I want to take a moment and really highlight for you. So this is a section where we want to place a lot of our energy and focus, and a section where we see as an opportunity for our teachers, all teachers, to empower themselves and see themselves as teachers of English learners, equipped with the tools that they need to do that. In this section, Section 4, we're also looking to meet students' needs. So this is really an opportunity to take that individualized, customized approach that we know is sound education policy that meets students' needs and isn't dependent or focused on school, adult, or programmatic needs. It really gives students what they need to learn the content and develop their English language skills. And another exciting piece of this Section 4 is really the opportunity to see language as an asset and not as a barrier. And that's a mindset that we're really trying to grow as a district, as a community, as individual schools, as educators, that language, that multilingualism is something that we value and that we would like to see all of our students be able to achieve. So taking a look at what some of those programmatic implications entail. This slide here gives us a sense of what we are currently implementing in varying degrees and some newer things that our revised Lau Plan calls for. So we We will continue our programming for intensive English language development. So these are our newer students, early English proficient, as well as our CAL students, our cognitive academic language skills students. So these are students that are perhaps have the basic conversational English, but need more support with the academic vocabulary, for example. We, in previous Lau Plan, have had some focus on what you see in the middle column. This revised Lau Plan sort of activates a deepening or a deeper focus into some key areas. So into the Literacy Academy, so our students with limited and interrupted education. Collaboration will be a key point. Looking down at the bottom, the individual language plans is really something that that can be a really important tool to activate, to center collaboration, and to activate students' language skills. In terms of expanding added elements, this is what we've seen from various research. As students develop literacy in their home language or their heritage language, that those skills are transferred to English, and their English development actually becomes richer, deeper, more efficient in some ways. And the increased assessment needs that we're looking at here is tied to the dual identification of students who have special education services or are on their response to intervention programming to see what are some issues besides language that might be impacting their learning. So these programmatic implications really focus, collaboration focuses a lot of this. The opportunities for general educators to learn and work together with English language teachers is one of the best forms of professional development. It's realistic to have our general educators have the tools that they need to work with the English language learners in their classroom. This collaboration does have some implication in terms of time and staffing. Another key piece to this program is the certification of more general educators with the ESOL Endorsement. This again gives them additional tools to work with English learners, and by the way, the same tools that that help to increase the capacity of all of our students and all of our teachers. The role clarification piece, this is something that has come up over the last few years. Increasingly, our English language teachers are really being called to do two things. One is provide direct instruction for students, as well as building the capacity of their general education peers. We need to develop those skills. This is something that teachers often find either they don't have the skill set to do one or the other, or in the sort of resource constraints of our current time, we don't have the full capacity to do that to the level that we need. And then one last thing about individual language plans. You may be familiar with individual education plans for special education students. This is the ILP is really a more robust way to put the language domains of learning, reading, writing, listening, speaking front and center and be the center of collaboration with general educators and be a more useful tool for our teachers and for our students. So the final piece here is just taking a look at some emerging costs based on this revision. In terms of collaboration, we are currently working with principals to take a look at the FTE dedicated to English learners. And we're also taking a look at who has the skill set and what sort of professional development is needed to increase our teachers' capacity to build our general educators' skill set. And collaboration would also, as I mentioned before, be the place where the individual language plan lives. In terms of getting the endorsement for as many, or for some key people, really, whether it's literacy coaches or other coaches in the district that have that English learner lens. To get that certification, that endorsement, it's about $1,500 per course for 5 courses. So we'd like to support. Some literacy coaches already have the endorsement. We'd like all of them to have it, and we think that would enrich. I just had a conversation with our English with our EL teacher leaders today, many of whom are working with literacy coaches, and seeing how enriching that work has been. And this is something that we could also work with our middle school strategists as well. So there's some costs associated with that. In terms of the other pieces down at the bottom here, our SLIFE programming, using our former middle school program as a model of 1 teacher, 1 ed tech, and a part-time social worker. That is something that we would use to calculate the costs of working with our students with limited interrupted education. We've talked a bit about the nuanced and the technical knowledge needed for our special educators and EL teachers to work with a very complex group of students who were trying to separate language from a disability, and that's something that if we had a dedicated staff member to do that would be something that all of our schools would benefit from. Heritage and native language programming. Last year we were able to pilot a program with East End, and this is something that we would be interested in working with other schools and other languages. And increasing language support for new arrivals. This is to help students transition to schools. So new arrivals who are, not all of them, some of them have much easier transitions, but somebody who speaks the language that can orient them to American schools, that can help them know the ins and outs of American schools is something that would be helpful, and that investment would allow us to have somebody at the district level that we could assign in other schools or throughout the district. So that takes us to our next steps with the Lau Plan. So you are voting on this policy at the next meeting, hopefully, and we will continue to capture some of the Lau Plan adjustments in this year's budget for next year. And we will weave in our Lau Plan recommendations into school success plans as we move forward. So that's it in a nutshell, trying to capture something that has involved a lot of people, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all the folks that have helped out with that, and a special shout out to Maureen Fox, who has been really instrumental as our ELL specialist, in all of these areas. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Do
you.
we have any questions? Ms. Bondo, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the. This is really huge. I have two questions. When I look at on our student population today, we have 844 on the level 1 and 2. Those are the emerging stage. And we have a 440 on the new arrival. So I look at on the aspect on the achievement gap, because the language is a key major for those students to be able to achieve and to go to high expectation. And since I've been in Maine here over 10 years, I've been see the achievement gap wide, keep growing over the years. And we've been all the time having that conversation how to try to reduce that. And all the years that I've been working to the community and advocating, those are the programs that being underfunded all the time. Those are most important. So while we're talking, and I think I can call to my colleague on the board to make sure that while we're talking about the achievement gap, we need to make sure that those programs are well funded. Otherwise, we don't have any conversation about the achievement gap otherwise. Because those are the key major programs, Making Happen, Language Heritage, the summer program that I heard last time, and couple more are so key major for those specific students to rise up. So it's up to us now to see what we're funding, because most of those programs been funded by grants, and it's a one-year program. The language heritage, I followed the language heritage at East End, and it was amazing to have those children. I'm a mom with children speaking more than 4 languages. And 2 of them, they are born here in the United States. It's a key major. So it's on the budget season. I want to take the opportunity to reflect on that, to make sure that we can try to see now where we're going. With those new arrivals to the public system, it's going to be a bigger, wide achievement gap is going to be on the road for years. So it's up to us now to see how we can impact that population to make sure that every child cannot be left behind, but we're investing exactly on some of those programs can rise those students for the next generation. And I'm so glad and pleased, applaud you for the small amount that you have. You try to do the best to try to impact those students. Thank you so much for what you're doing. We're now going to support all the different steps that we're going to go with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo.
Can I just make one quick comment about that? When Carlos showed the slide of sustain, deepen, expand, that deepen column, I just want to put a fine point on in the context of what you just shared, because we had in our previous plan, noted that those were things we wanted to have, but I think our schools have at times said that there's a choice they have to make. So the teacher either has to focus on collaboration or feels like they have to really do the pull-out instruction, and the other thing suffers. So Carlos mentioned the FTE analysis that we're working on with the principals. He's led some amazing work to try to come up with a more sophisticated approach to staffing and how we plan staffing based on the number of students, and then including the nuance that he described in terms of their language levels and the other variables at play. And we have some numeric algorithms that we run to look at basic assumptions. But something new we're doing this year is this bottoms-up analysis with principals, where we've grounded ourselves in the plan. We've talked about things like collaboration. Sometimes it's hard to plan the resource needed in a school just based on the number of students, because, Sue Ellen famously says, if she has 20 or 40 students, she still needs the same amount of teacher time for the co-planning and collaboration. So we're working closely with them to say, you understand that we are working in a resource-constrained environment. You understand that there are other levers as an administrator you need to pull and could pull to accommodate what's going to work best in service of meeting these students' needs. So, for example, your schedule. That has to be something you look at changing around to make the resources work. So knowing that you're kind of open to those things, then what do you really believe is needed, given all the data you have on the students in your school and what the plan calls for in order to pull it off. And so that's what we're going to roll up and ultimately bring forward to you guys. Here's what it looks like if we want to have the the heritage language and the SLIFE programming and the collaboration happening, and then we can all talk about what that really means in terms of how much add it would be, if at all.
Just to follow up on that, and will that be in time for this
Yeah.
year's budget process?
Yes.
Mr. Boffins?
Just want to put the curriculum committee's role into context. We just got the broad strokes. We didn't review the revisions to the Lau Plan, and I just want to highlight that because I know when things come out of committee, we rely a lot on the committee's work, and so just want to highlight that for the board.
Appreciate that. So, Ms.
I just had a question about the student population and how we are identifying these English language learners at Portland Public Schools. And then once these students are identified, what we are doing to place them in the complexities of the different English language learners.
Sure.
You want this one?
Actually, more fun with the arrow, with the clicker. Here we go. Thank you for that question. So we focused on Section 4 here, but Section 3 is as rich and as complex a section, the identification of English learners. So we basically, the state of Maine, and this is national, I believe, anytime a student enrolls in a school district, must complete a language use survey, and if and when they identify a language other than English, then we have to assess their English in reading, writing, listening, speaking. And based on that assessment, a student is either an English learner or English proficient. If the student is an English learner, then they are entitled to specific services, English language services. And based on where they are in that proficiency level, they receive either intensive English language development for basic level English or more advanced. So typically, in terms of the complexity, where did I go?
What do you want? Complexity?
The complexity one, yeah, thank you. In terms of the complexity, sometimes these things are learned over time. Sometimes they are known immediately. And it's really the individual language plan developed by the English language teachers, working with the students and the family to sort of identify what those services are, and then monitoring it on a regular basis. So depending on what the student needs, we tailor the programming for the student's needs.
Thank you.
And there's a cool flow chart.
Yeah,
on
I
the,
was just looking at
in the Lau Plan.
It starts with the parent guardian. And even the chart itself has a couple of the, like Carlos was saying, how they could be referred after that level. Let's go Ms. Victor and then back to Ms. Bondo.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was the context was really helpful, and the information is really valuable to me. I really appreciate it.
Great.
I was wondering about the heritage language programming, and it sounds like that's being piloted at East End, and I'm just wondering what that looks like.
So that was, last year we received the Starting Strong grant, and we focused on French and Arabic for 16 weeks, twice a week, for about an hour, 30 minutes. We had mostly third, fourth, and fifth graders, some younger students, and we had heritage fluent speakers, essentially. Several of them were educators in their own country, and super invested members of their community invested in really maintaining the language. So I think that the big takeaway from that is that families and students felt more connected to their own history, their own culture, their own parents, their own families, and they had pride, and they were able to pronounce things more clearly in many cases. They were able to expand their vocabulary. They were able to tell stories in their languages that absent that language would fade away. And this is, I think this is something that you could almost, if you could invent something to measure the joy and the pride that children and parents felt, that would be pretty powerful.
Yeah. And can I add to that? Because we've talked before about this, how in the past, that wasn't encouraged. In the past, in public schools, it was pretty much frowned upon if you spoke your home language. And students, and I remember in my community, that was very common. When you're amongst your peers and you're speaking, for us it was Spanish, the other students who were proficient in English would make fun of you. It's like, oh, that guy still doesn't speak English. So there was this really, societal pressures for you to not speak your language. You were bullied into it. You were looked at, as we used to. We used to call them all sorts of names. I'll spare you guys. Ms. Bondo, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you. I would like just to add about the language heritage, the diversity. Then we had, it was just only the African French speaker, but we have the European French speaker countries. So that means open up those doors for different diversity, be in the classroom, because I was there most of the time, to see our kids open up their mindset, to think, to have that critical thinking open up on those two languages. It was just the beautiful way to see how the students been combining on the lovely language they used to learn. Thank you for that. My question is that, do we have a data about the long terms, when you qualify those long-term learning, I mean, when they cannot exceed the process, the learning process, and they're being assessed like a long-term English learner? Do we have the data, how much percentage we have of that?
It's that group itself is a complex group, and there's some national research on what factors contribute to students remaining identified as English learners. Mm-hmm. It's something that a lot of districts struggle with, and there are a number of factors that some of it overlapping with the factors that you see up here, but it is something that we have professional learning groups or committees that do child study cases to see what are the issues that are getting in the way, because sometimes there are other factors that are there. So,
and I would just add, we do have data, I think, to your question. I not right now in front of us, but that we could follow up and share on elevation, I think. The number and percent of students who are considered long-term.
I remember when I have my trainer, I think they're supposed to go to the level 6. Did we reduce that one to the assessment? How many on those levels now to be qualified as a exit student?
So the proficiency level is 4.5.
It's now 4.5.
And this revised Lau Plan reflects that, whereas the previous one reflected the 6.0 that you were alluding to.
Thank you.
So to that, I've been waiting to ask a question around that. So when that changed, when the level of exiting changed, that was like 2 years ago, I think, right? So what if we're looking at 1,000 or over 1,400 students right now? What were we looking at before that, when the standards were higher?
We were about the same. At that time, we were about 1,600, and with that change in proficiency, we had I believe about 100 students that exited with that level.
And so those 100 students, as any other student that would have exited, we tracked them for the following year.
Right, they're under monitoring for 2 years.
Can we say how many of them remained having exited ELO, and how many of them had to go back to ELO services?
I think all of them have
remained
exited and remained exited.
Okay, excellent. I'm sorry, Mr. Burke, you had a question?
comment.
Oh, you have the floor. I'll wait for mine.
Just as last time when you presented on the extended learning opportunities, there's so much that I hear that is happening in the work that you're leading that feels like a beautiful reimagining of what we can do with education. And I just want to say thank you again, and I'm very grateful you're here with us doing this work.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Good. I had just a clarifying question, and I think I know the answer, but for the students with limited or interrupted formal education, when they arrive, they're placed on grades determined by their age?
Yes.
Okay. And I have one more question. I know I made a note. Yeah, okay, the ESOL endorsements, that's just a one-time expense, right? So once the person has that endorsement or the teacher, they don't have to do any sort of like continuing
They have to renew every 5 years, I believe.
Is there a cost associated to that?
Not specifically. I mean, you have to have a plan, and it has to be approved, and you have to, fulfill the terms of the plan, but I don't think there's sometimes it's taking courses, sometimes it's going to workshops and things along those lines. So there could be a charge, but it would not be an additional charge to the district.
And in most cases, I think educators, and that's part of their certification cost.
Part of the whole package. It's not a separate
I see.
additional qualification that you have to keep.
Excellent, good. And so how many ESOL endorsed educators do we have right now in the district?
Good question. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
But I will say that this is I think Carlos mentioned earlier that this exploration is leading us to get really clear on that.
Yeah.
I think he talked about how many literacy coaches, but that's something we're getting more curious about so we can be more intentional in looking at both positions that have wide reach, which is what we're proposing here, is starting with people in coaching positions, but then also prioritizing schools that have higher EL populations.
Of course. Good.
And we have, I believe, 49 or so EL endorsed or EL teachers. We have several educators, general educators, that have the ESOL endorsement, some that are one course or a praxis exam away. And I think this is something that hopefully we can get more people to embrace that and recognize that we value them having that endorsement.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it makes excellent sense to me to encourage that endorsement. Any other questions? Oh, Ms. Victor and then Ms. Atkinson.
Just a very small thing. I'm wondering if we can upload the presentation into board docs. Thank you so much. Sorry?
Not this one.
It is now.
Oh,
Oh,
I did it while we were
since we
sitting
started
here,
this?
so, yes. Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
Pulled another fast one. Ms. Atkinson, you have the floor.
Yeah, I
If
just
you
wanted
refresh, you should have it.
I really appreciate the presentation. I especially appreciated seeing the heritage language support and the desire to expand and deepen that, and that the statement that language is an asset to be cultivated. One of the things that sort of rubbed me the wrong way about the video is it's very English-centric. There was something in there, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but, without English, there is no learning or something like that. And, English is the language that our schools teach in primarily, with the exception of the LISETH immersion program. But, that doesn't mean that English is the only language that learning can be done in. And I think it's important to state that and to say that we value these other languages, that these other languages besides that are not English are valuable and are valid languages and are legitimate. English is our context, and that's some baggage that we're sort of bringing to the table, and a barrier that we have a responsibility to break down in collaboration with students to allow them to engage with the education that we are providing. and not that there's a value judgment against any languages that don't happen to be the predominant language in our context. So I appreciated that, and I just wanted to make sure that that I said something about that, because when I just saw the video, I was a bit like, "Whoa, is this really where we're starting?" Because it just seems so English. English is the only way, sort of message that I was getting from it. So thank you.
If we don't, nothing else? Good. Not good, but thank you so much. Great presentation. Every time that we talk about English language learners, it like resonates with me so much. When I arrived to this country, I have two older sisters, and both of my sisters were placed in ELO classes, and I was placed in regular, because I guess I probably had I didn't test. But we had very different experiences in our schools, and not just in our academics, but in our social experiences, and so we do things so differently today. We really do, and the heritage language, the appreciation of that, and the support that we give that, I think we can probably promote that even further. Because I would imagine that socially those pressures still exist for some of these children who haven't mastered English, and what Ms. Atkinson said, that we probably still hear some overtone of like English is the way to be successful. But again, I do think that we're changing the way that we're viewing these students in our districts, and what we're doing here is pretty exciting. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ms. Bondo has that.
Oh, Ms. Bondo, sorry.
Excuse me, but I just want to make sure on the population today, because I know that when we have I had an issue of bilingual parents, even though he's American born, that child can be considered to be in that range. Are we counting those specific students as well in that population today, or those are classification on the side?
So approximately at least a third, close to a half of students that are English learners are born in the U.S.
Okay.
So it does include them.
So do we have those assessments? They do us while we do the assessment, and they can reach the 4.5. They can exit right away, right?
Yes.
That's what happened to my children. Yeah. But I mean, we just need to make sure, because it's building a culture, it's bringing a lot of frustration to parents to see then is kind of little wasting on that learning process, instead of those students to be already, because they're already on the mainstream culture. So I think we just need to make sure that we do the assessment on time, and then those students can be exit right away.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Right. Thank you.
All right, we're all done for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that.